There is a question that every intelligence service in the world has tried to answer, and almost none of them will admit they've asked it. How do you send a woman, alone, into the most surveilled city in the Arab world, through 4 military checkpoints, and into the private home of a general who has people watching his own staff? The answer is not technology. It is not firepower. It is something older and more dangerous than either. You make her someone she is not. Completely, permanently. Down to the grief in her eyes when she talks about a husband who never existed. In the spring of 2007, a woman crossed from Lebanon into Syria on a shared taxi. She was not Israeli. There was nothing on her body, in her bag, or in her manner that suggested she was anything other than what her documents said she was. A Syrian woman, mid-30s, widowed, traveling to Damascus for work. She had a name on that identity card. It was not her name. She had a history attached to that name, a neighborhood, a school, a dead husband with a real grave in a real cemetery that she could describe from memory because she had visited it twice during preparation. She had rehearsed what it felt like to be this woman for over a year. What no amount of rehearsal can prepare you for is the first checkpoint. Not because of what the soldiers do, but because of what happens inside you when someone looks at your false face and asks you who you are, and you have to answer without hesitation. Not because you've memorized the answer, but because somewhere in the preceding 12 months you have made yourself believe it. The border post was routine. A Syrian officer looked at her card, looked at her face, looked at the card again. She had been trained for the slight delay, trained not to fill silence with explanation, which is what guilty people do. She waited with the expression of a woman who finds this tedious. He stamped the card. She got back in the taxi. The driver was talking to the man in the front seat about the price of fuel. She looked out the window at the Syrian landscape and felt nothing she was allowed to feel. Her name, the name we will use, was Nadia. Not her real name. Not her operational code name, which has never been released. A name chosen here because it belonged to nobody in this story, and because she deserves, at minimum, to be called something. Nadia had been recruited by Israeli intelligence nearly 4 years before this mission. She was not recruited because she was extraordinary in any visible sense. She was recruited because she was fluent in the precise Arabic dialect of Damascus, not classroom Arabic, not the neutral standard of a broadcaster, but the particular, unhurried cadence of a woman who grew up in the streets south of the old city. She was recruited because she had a face that no one remembered. Not plain, not beautiful, forgettable in the way that is operationally more valuable than either. And she was recruited because of something her handler described, years later, in an interview with an Israeli journalist, in a single sentence that the journalist buried in the middle of a longer profile. He said she had the ability to grieve for things that had not happened to her. What that meant, practically, was this. Every deep cover operative carries what the intelligence community calls a legend. Not a cover story. A cover story is what you tell people when they ask. A legend is everything underneath the story, the emotional weight of a life. The small involuntary things, the way you refer to your childhood, the way you talk about your mother, the catch in your voice when someone mentions a place you supposedly miss. Those things cannot be faked in training. They can only be built, slowly, by a person who is willing to take a fictional life and inhabit it until the feelings become real. Nadia had been doing that for a year. She had a dead husband named Tariq. She had a mother in poor health in a city she had supposedly left. She had a reason for needing work that was sympathetic but not dramatic, the quiet financial strain of a widow without family support, looking for respectable employment. None of it was true. All of it was completely true to her when she said it. The second checkpoint was outside Damascus, a military position that had been tightened in the preceding months as a response to political instability in the region. Everyone out of the vehicle. Documents. Bag check. She stood by the taxi in the afternoon light and watched a soldier go through her bag with the disinterested efficiency of a man who has done this 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters, her personal items, the 1,000 times today. He found her letters the small things a woman carries. He found a handwritten letter addressed to a Damascus woman, a real person, a real address, someone whose name Nadia had been given as a contact reference, and who had, without fully understanding what she was agreeing to, allowed herself to be used as a thread in this operation. The letter was authentic correspondence. The handwriting was real. The relationship it described was real. What was entirely false was Nadia's connection to it. The soldier looked at it, put it back. She picked up her bag, got back in the taxi. Here's the first thing you need to understand about what she was walking into. The general she was targeting was not a figurehead. He was not a bureaucrat with a title. He was a man in the operational center of a program that Israeli intelligence had been trying to understand for 3 years. A program that, if its purpose was what they suspected, would force a decision by the Israeli government that no one in Jerusalem was prepared to announce publicly. Not chemical weapons, although Syria had those. Not conventional missiles, although Syria had those too. Something that the International Atomic Energy Agency was not supposed to know existed. Something that, as of the spring of 2007, no Western intelligence service had been able to confirm with the specificity that would translate intelligence suspicion into actionable certainty. Satellite imagery showed movement, signals. Intelligence had gone quiet, which is its own kind of signal, meaning the Syrians had changed their communications protocols, which meant they knew someone was listening. To know what was being built, you had to be physically present in proximity to someone who knew. The third checkpoint was where something went wrong. Not catastrophically, not visibly, but the kind of wrong that operatives carry with them for the rest of the mission, like a sound they can't unhear. A soldier at this position had been rotated off the route 6 weeks earlier, according to intelligence Mossad had gathered on checkpoint schedules in this corridor. He was not supposed to be here. He was here. And when he looked at her face, something in his expression changed in a way that she could not immediately read, not recognition, not suspicion. Something less defined than either. The slight adjustment of a man who is trying to place something he can't quite locate. She had passed through Damascus 3 months earlier on a preliminary reconnaissance. A different legend, different car, different clothes. Standard, pre-operational groundwork. Whether he had seen her then was something she had no way to know. She did not look away first. She asked him, in the flat Arabic of a tired woman, whether there was a problem. He handed back her papers. She walked through. She did not know, and would not know for some time, whether that soldier had truly placed her and decided to let her pass, or whether what she had read in his face was nothing more than the ordinary blankness of a man at the end of a long shift. She did not know whether, in the next hour, he would pick up a phone. She carried that uncertainty through the 4th checkpoint, through the authorization check, through the phone call that a senior guard made to verify her business in the district, a phone call whose other end she could not hear, could not control, could only wait through with the patience of a woman who has been somewhere inside a false identity for long enough that patience itself has been replaced by something she no longer has a name for. What she did not yet know, what she would not learn until the mission was over, was who had answered that call, and what they had decided to tell the guard about her. The house was wrong, not dangerous wrong, not the kind of wrong that triggers an abort. Just different from the operational picture she had been given, and in deep cover work, different is its own category of problem because your body has rehearsed for one version of a place and arrived in another. She had been briefed on a residence with visible security architecture. Guards at the gate, restricted internal movement, the physical vocabulary of a senior regime official's home, the kind of place that announces its own importance through controlled access and deliberate intimidation. What she walked into was a household. Children's shoes near the entrance. A garden that had gone slightly untended. The smell of something cooking from the back of the house. A woman's voice calling to someone upstairs. The general's wife came to greet her herself. No intermediary. No staff member passing her through a secondary check. The wife, we will call her Khalid, which is how she was referred to in the briefing materials, a courtesy title rather than a name, came down a tiled hallway and extended her hand, and said she was glad Nadia had arrived safely. The roads had been difficult lately. Nadia said yes. A little traffic near the second checkpoint, nothing serious. She said it in the voice of the woman she was supposed to be. The interview happened in a sitting room off the main hallway. Formal, but not cold. Tea was brought. Khalid was practical and direct in the way of a woman who had run a complicated household for many years and had learned to assess people quickly because she did not have time to be wrong about them. She asked about Nadia's background, her experience, the circumstances of her widowhood. Nadia answered everything. She had answered these questions in rehearsal dozens of times, with her handler playing the role of the interviewer and occasionally trying to find the seam where the legend became thin. There was one moment in the interview where the seam came close to the surface. Khalid mentioned a neighborhood in Damascus, a specific street within it. She said she had family there, an aunt who had lived there for 40 years. Nadia's legend placed her in that neighborhood during a period of her supposed life in the city. She said she knew it well. She described the shop on the corner, the sound of the call to prayer from the mosque 2 streets over at dawn, slightly out of sync with the other mosques in the area because the muezzin there had always run a few seconds early, which was a local joke. Khalid looked at her for a moment. Then she said yes. That was exactly right about the muezzin. Her aunt had complained about it for years. She moved on. Nadia was given a small room on the ground floor. Access to the front rooms of the house, the correspondence desk, the general's scheduling materials for household appointments. Not his professional life, that was kept entirely elsewhere, but the texture of his private one. Who visited? When? What was served? What was discussed at dinner when the conversation was meant to be off the record? She understood that this was the actual intelligence. Not documents, not technical specifications. The pattern of a man's life told through the shape of his evenings. On the 3rd day, she began to understand why the house felt wrong. It was not the security architecture that had been misrepresented in the briefing. The briefing had simply been assembled from older intelligence, from a period when the general's household had a different profile. Something had changed in the preceding months. The visible security had been reduced, not eliminated, redistributed, which meant it existed somewhere she was not seeing it. On the 5th day, she found one piece of it. A man who came to the house each morning under the description of a household maintenance worker. He fixed nothing. He stayed approximately 40 minutes. He drank tea in the kitchen and talked with the domestic staff. He was not maintenance. The way he moved through the house, the things he noticed, the questions he asked the staff dressed as small talk, was the particular pattern of someone building a regular assessment of the people inside the building. He was reporting on the household, not on her specifically, on everyone. This was standard practice in the homes of senior regime officials. An internal watch kept not because anyone was suspected of anything, but because suspicion was the baseline condition of a security state. She was not his target. She was inside his field of view. She made her first exfil contact on the 6th day. The mechanism was simple and low risk. A brief coded exchange through a civilian channel that left no trace she had initiated it. She reported what she had found about the maintenance man. She reported the discrepancy between the briefing and the actual security structure of the house. The response came back within 18 hours. It said, "Continue." It did not address the discrepancy. She would later describe this moment, not in any document that has entered the public record, but in the manner that people who have carried things for a long time sometimes describe them, obliquely, to people they trust, as the moment she began to suspect that the people running her operation did not have a complete picture of what she was inside. Not that they were careless, not that they had sent her in without preparation, but that the intelligence used to build her operational environment had gaps that no one had told her about, possibly because no one knew. Possibly because the gaps had been judged acceptable from a distance that they would not have been judged acceptable from inside the house. She kept that thought in a part of herself she did not visit often. There was no operational value in it, but it was there. On the 9th day, the general's wife came to find her in the correspondence room in the early evening. She said, "One of my husband's colleagues has been asking about you." She said it with the mild tone of someone passing on a piece of household information. Nothing pointed in it. Nothing that announced itself as significant. She did not say which colleague. She did not say whether the question had been casual or formal. She waited to see what Nadia would do with it. This is the moment where an operative trained for crisis response feels the system kick in. The protocols, the prepared answers, the way training routes you away from panic and toward procedure. But there is a thing that training does not fully account for, which is the person sitting across from you and the fact that she is not your enemy. Khalid was not hostile. She was not running a trap. She was a woman who had, in 9 days, begun to treat Nadia with the ordinary warmth of an employer who has found someone reliable. She was passing on information she thought Nadia might want, which meant she trusted her, which meant the thing Nadia now had to do, manage this information, contain the risk, maneuver around the question without raising a new one, required deceiving someone who had been kind to her. This is the cost that operational briefings do not prepare you for, because it is not tactical. She asked for the colleague's name in a tone that suggested mild curiosity. Khalid gave it. Nadia placed a beat of recognition on her face. Not too much, just enough, and said she thought she might have met him once, years ago, through a mutual connection. She named a specific person, a real individual, someone she had been briefed on as a social contact who overlapped with this household's world and who could plausibly appear in a widowed woman's peripheral social history. She asked whether Khalid thought that could be right, whether he might have known that person. Khalid said she wasn't certain, but it was possible. He knew many people. The conversation moved on, but here is what did not move on. The colleague's name, she recognized it. Not from the social briefing she had just used to deflect. From a different part of the operational intelligence she had been given before insertion, a list of individuals in proximity to the household who had, in the preceding 2 years, provided periodic information to Syrian Air Force intelligence. He was not an investigator. He was not assigned to counterintelligence work. He was a social informant. Someone who reported interesting things he noticed because it was useful to be the kind of person who did that. He had noticed her, not because her cover had broken, not because he had any specific information about who she was, because she was new. And he reported new things. She lay in her room that night and ran the abort calculation for the first time. Not panicking. Calculating. The way you calculate when you are trying to determine whether the thing you are still inside of has already exceeded the risk threshold at which staying serves anyone. The maintenance man assessed the household regularly. A social informant had asked about her. The security architecture was different from the briefing. 3 unknowns, none of them confirmed threats, all of them running at the same time. Any one of them, in isolation, manageable. Together, a pattern she did not have enough information to read. She decided she needed 48 more hours, long enough to determine whether the informant's question was routine or the beginning of something, long enough to get what she had come for if it was going to come at all. She made that decision alone, in a small room, in a house where 2 people were watching the household and neither of them knew about the other, and somewhere behind her the soldier at the 3rd checkpoint may or may not have made a phone call she still did not have an answer to. She did not sleep. What she did not know that night was that the person who had answered the guard's phone call at checkpoint 4, the call that had verified her business in the district and raised the barrier and let her walk the last 400 meters to this house, was not the general's wife. It was not a household employee. It was someone whose name, if she had heard it, would have changed every calculation she had made about whether the deception was holding. On the 11th day, she heard the word. Not in the way the operational briefing had anticipated. The briefing had modeled 3 likely scenarios for how the intelligence might surface. A phone call overheard from the adjacent room, a document passing through the correspondence desk, A conversation at dinner when the general's guard was down and the evening had gone long enough that the careful people become less careful. None of those happened. What happened was this. She was carrying a tray of tea from the kitchen to the front sitting room when the general passed her in the hallway. He was on his way out. Coat on, keys in his hand, already thinking about wherever he was going. He said something to her without looking at her, a brief, distracted instruction about a car arriving for his wife in the afternoon. Make sure someone is available to receive it. She said yes, of course. He said a name. A place name, attached to a meeting the following week, thrown out in passing as a reference point his wife would understand. One word. He was already at the door. She stood in the hallway with the tray and did not move for approximately 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a very long time when you are trying to decide whether what you just heard is the thing you came for, or whether you are about to make the most expensive mistake an operative can make, which is not missing the intelligence, but convincing yourself you have found it when you haven't. The word was a location reference, a place name from the eastern part of the country, unremarkable on its own, meaningless to anyone who did not already hold the other fragments. She held the other fragments. Placed against them, this word was a geographic coordinate expressed in civilian language. A man telling his wife where he would be next week because she needed to know his schedule, not because he was being careless with classified information. He was not being careless. He was just a man with a coat on, going somewhere. She carried the tray into the sitting room and set it down and went back to her work. The false start came that afternoon. She had been given one method for transmitting intelligence that could not go through the regular exfil channel, a mechanism reserved for time-sensitive material, higher risk, faster turnaround. She had never used it. She had been told to use it only if she was certain. She was not certain. She sat with the decision for 4 hours and decided she was certain enough. She initiated the mechanism. Halfway through the process, something in the channel felt wrong, a response pattern that was slightly off from what she had been trained to expect. Not broken, not a clear signal of compromise. Just wrong enough that stopping was the only defensible choice. She stopped. She sat with what she had not transmitted for the rest of the afternoon. Whether the channel had been clean and her nerves had manufactured a problem, or whether her instinct had saved the operation from a critical exposure, she had no way to determine. This is the specific loneliness of a decision made alone in a house full of people. You cannot debrief yourself. You cannot ask someone else to check your read. You sit with the choice and the uncertainty accumulates around it like weather. That evening, the near abort happened. The maintenance man did not come in the morning as usual. He came in the evening, which he'd never done before. He stayed longer than 40 minutes. At one point, he came into the corridor outside the room where she was working and stood there for a moment doing nothing in particular, looking at something on the wall, adjusting something, the ordinary business of a man with ordinary reasons to be in that part of the house. She did not look up. He left. She ran the abort calculation again, faster this time, with less patience for ambiguity. The changed schedule, the extended stay, the corridor. Individually, each of those things had an innocent explanation. Together, they had the texture of something moving toward her. She decided to be out of the house in 48 hours, regardless of what she had or had not confirmed. She decided this quietly, without signaling it to anyone, and then returned to her work because leaving immediately would be the most dangerous thing she could do. The only version of departure that was safe was a departure that looked like it had a reason. The reason came the next morning without her having to manufacture it. Khalid mentioned, over breakfast, that her sister had telephoned. There was a family matter, the vague, weighty kind that is understood in that part of the world to mean something medical, something elderly, something that a decent woman with no other obligations would feel compelled to attend to. Nadia said, carefully, that she hoped it was not serious. Khalid said these things were rarely as serious as they seemed. Nadia waited until mid-morning and then came to find Khalid with an expression she had not manufactured. It was the expression of a woman choosing between two things she needed, and it was real because she was choosing between two things she actually needed: the intelligence she had not yet confirmed and the exit that was now available to her. She said there had been a message from her mother's neighbor. Her mother's health had taken a turn. She was sorry. She was deeply sorry. She would come back as soon as it was resolved, if the position was still available. Khalid was genuinely warm about it. Said family came first. Said the position would be there. Nadia thanked her. Here is the incorrect assumption playing out. She had spent 12 days believing that the primary risk in this house was the informant, the colleague who had asked about her, whose report she had attempted to preempt by building a plausible social connection between them. She had managed that risk carefully. She had given him a thread of plausibility that she believed he had accepted. What she had not fully accounted for was the maintenance man. Not because he had identified her, he had not. Not because his evening visit had been surveillance directed at her specifically. It had not. He had spent that extended evening visit talking to a member of the domestic staff about a completely separate matter. A dispute about household accounts, the kind of internal friction that accumulates in large households and occasionally requires someone from outside to mediate. He had come in the evening because the staff member was not available in the morning. He had stood in the corridor because he had gone to the wrong room first. Everything she had read as convergence was coincidence. The risk she had been preparing to run from was not there. The risk she had not prepared for was the one she was about to walk through. The false release came at the door. Khalid walked her out personally, which Nadia had not expected. They stood in the entrance for a moment. The small, slightly extended goodbye of two women who have spent nearly 2 weeks in proximity and have, without intending to, developed a degree of mutual regard. Khalid said she had seemed settled here. She said it with a mild, unreadable warmth. The observation of a woman who had watched someone move through a household and found the movement natural. Nadia said she had felt settled. Both things were true. She picked up her bag, and in the space between picking up the bag and saying the final goodbye, something happened that she would return to for a long time afterward. Khalid touched her arm. Briefly, the small physical punctuation of a genuine goodbye. She said, "Travel safe." She walked out through the gate and down the street and did not look back. For approximately 4 minutes, she felt something that her training would have categorized as false release. The dangerous emotional exhale of an operative who believes the hard part is over when the hard part is not over. She knew this. She had been taught to identify it. She felt it anyway. It lasted until she turned the corner and the house was out of sight. And then it stopped. Because she was still in Syria, still inside the legend, still carrying something she had not yet successfully transmitted, still uncertain about what the maintenance man's changed schedule had actually meant, still carrying the word she had heard in the hallway, which she now believed was real intelligence, and had not yet passed to anyone who could use it, and still not knowing who had answered the phone at Checkpoint 4. That question had not left her since the night she had first understood it. It was with her now, on this street, in this city, in this body that was not hers. She walked toward the taxi stand. She did not transmit the intelligence on the way out. This was a decision made in the taxi, somewhere between the general's neighborhood and the outer edge of the city, when she ran the channel assessment a final time and concluded that the conditions for a clean transmission did not exist. The channel she had aborted 2 days earlier still carried the faint possibility of compromise. Using it now, with the intelligence inside her, would mean gambling the entire operation on a mechanism she had already doubted once. She held it. This meant she was carrying it physically, inside her memory, inside her body, across 4 checkpoints, across a border, through the shared taxi back into Lebanon. There is a specific vulnerability in this that the operational model is designed to avoid. An operative who has not transmitted is an operative whose capture constitutes total loss. Everything she had gathered, Everything she had risked 19 days to collect existed in one place. She knew this. She crossed the checkpoints anyway. The third checkpoint was the one she had been thinking about since day 6. The soldier who had looked at her face too long on the way in was not on duty. She did not allow herself to feel anything about this until she was 2 kilometers past it. Then she felt it. Not relief. Something colder and more accurate than relief. The recognition that the difference between a clean exfiltration and a catastrophic one had been a shift change, a bureaucratic rotation, something that had nothing to do with her preparation, her training, her 19 days of careful management. This is the part of intelligence work that does not appear in the operational assessments. The percentage of outcomes that belong to neither skill nor failure, but to the ordinary randomness of a world that does not know it is being operated in. She transmitted within 4 hours of crossing the border, the word she had heard in the general's hallway, the pattern of meetings attached to it, the secondary details, the timeline reference, the logistical implication embedded in a passing domestic instruction, that together pointed at something specific in the eastern Syrian interior. The handler on the other end of that exchange said very little. This was standard. The response was a confirmation of receipt and a brief instruction to stand down and await a debrief. She waited. The debrief happened over 2 days. It was thorough in the way that intelligence debriefs are thorough, not trying to understand her experience, but trying to extract from her experience every operationally useful fragment and assess it against what was already known. She was a source. The debrief was a collection process. She answered everything. Near the end of the second day, she asked about the phone call at checkpoint 4. Who had answered? What they had said. There was a pause. Her handler told her that the call had been answered by a member of the general's household staff who had been, for the preceding 8 months, a low-level cooperative contact. A person who had been carefully cultivated by a separate Mossad operational thread that Nadia's team had not been read into because the 2 operations were compartmentalized. The person who had raised the barrier for her had done so because they recognized the name she had used as her referral contact, a name that was also embedded, in a different context, in the cooperative contact's own operational relationship with Israeli intelligence. She had not cleared checkpoint 4 because her legend was perfect. She had cleared it because she had accidentally presented a credential that meant something entirely different from what she thought it meant, to someone who recognized it for reasons that had nothing to do with her. The deception had worked, for the wrong reason, on a mechanism she had not known existed. This is where the fallout begins. Not with a crisis, with a question that nobody at the debrief answered cleanly. If 2 Mossad operational threads were running simultaneously in the same household, if the cooperative contact inside the general's staff was reporting to one team and Nadia was inserted by another, then the cooperative contact had spent 8 months inside a household that a third intelligence presence had just entered for 19 days. 2 operations. Same house. No shared information. What the cooperative contact had made of her arrival, her presence, and her departure was not something the debrief addressed. Whether the cooperative contact had flagged her to their handler, and what that handler had done with the flag, and whether any of that had moved through channels that intersected with Syrian intelligence in ways that could not be fully traced, none of this was resolved in the debrief. It remained unresolved. 3 months after she left the house, the cooperative contact stopped reporting. Not because they were caught, not because they chose to stop. The contact moved, left Damascus for reasons that were personal and unrelated to the operation, relocated to another city, and the thread that had been maintained through them simply frayed and went quiet. The handler filed a routine closure report. What was not in the closure report was any assessment of what the cooperative contact had seen during the 19 days a separate operative had been living in the same building. What they knew, what they had said, to whom. That gap existed in the record. It still exists. The strategic consequence was this. The intelligence Nadia had transmitted contributed to a targeting package. That package, combined with satellite imagery and the separate Vienna operation that had extracted technical data from a Syrian official months earlier, gave Israeli intelligence sufficient confidence to take a decision to the government. On the 6th of September, 2007, Israeli Air Force aircraft entered Syrian airspace and destroyed a facility in the Deir ez-Zor region of eastern Syria. The facility was a nuclear reactor under construction, built on a North Korean design, hidden from international inspection, unknown to the public until years afterward when official acknowledgments arrived in careful bureaucratic language that said as little as possible. Syria denied everything. The IAEA eventually concluded otherwise. This is what is usually described as the outcome. The reactor was destroyed, the program was set back, the operation succeeded. This framing is not wrong, it is incomplete. The intermediary who had introduced Nadia to the general's household, the Syrian woman who had genuinely believed she was helping a respectable widow find respectable employment, continued to live in Damascus. She was not identified by Syrian intelligence. She was not questioned. She had no knowledge of what she had been part of, and therefore nothing in her behavior changed, which is the specific protection that operational ignorance provides. She was safe. The cost of her safety was this: she remained safe inside a city whose government, had it known what had passed through the door she had opened, would have had a legitimate claim to consider her complicit. She was innocent of that, entirely, but she was inside a story she did not know she was part of, and would remain inside it for the rest of her life. There is no clean accounting for that. Khalid held the position for 2 weeks, as she had promised. Then she filled it. Whether she thought about Nadia afterward is not something that exists in any record. Whether Nadia thought about her does not need a record. The institutional cost is harder to describe because institutions do not experience cost the way people do. What can be said is this: the compartmentalization failure, the 2 operations running in the same household without shared awareness, was reviewed internally. The review produced a procedural recommendation about cross-thread coordination in close target environments. The recommendation was filed. Whether it changed the practice in the ways it needed to change is not something that has been confirmed publicly. As for Nadia, there is no documented record of her subsequent career. No confirmed operational history after 2007. No interview, no memoir, no journalist with a verified source who can place her after the debrief. She is present in this story, and then she is not. This is not unusual for deep cover operatives. It is, in fact, the intended outcome. The whole architecture of a legend is designed to make a person unlocatable when the operation is over. It works on the cover. It does not work on the person wearing it. What a legend cannot dissolve is the experience of having been trusted by someone you were deceiving, of having sat in a woman's house for 19 days and eaten her food and received her warmth and her small physical gestures of genuine regard, and having given nothing real in return. Not nothing, you gave competence, reliability, the ordinary human presence of someone doing their job well, but not yourself. Never yourself. The reactor is gone. The woman who helped destroy it is somewhere. The woman who trusted her never knew. If this kind of history matters to you, the kind that doesn't make it into official records, that lives in gaps and classified files and the memories of people who are never going to talk, this channel is where that history lives. The next operation is one that most people have never heard of. They should have.